I did a course at the Institute of Directors, which was really interesting on strategy for board directors.
Mm,
And
mm,
one of the things they talked about is like all the process of strategy, and they talk about this in Play to Win as well. It's not one and done.
mm.
And a really important part of strategy is evaluate and review and change.
Yeah.
And so actually it is better to have a poor strategy and then you evaluate it and change it over time than it is to have a perfect strategy, which you then don't evaluate.
Today's guest is Anna Shipman. Anna is CTO at Kooth, former technical director at Financial Times, and an accomplished author. With Anna, we talked about her journey in tech and how to develop a good technical strategy, drawing from stories and examples from her 20 plus years of engineering experience. So let's dive in. Hey Anna, welcome and thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Luca. Really nice to join you.
Thank you. So Anna, you're a CTO at Kooth. You have been
Hmm.
technical director at Financial Times. You're a keynote speaker. And over the years, I've watched so many of your talks. So there are so many questions I want to ask you today. And maybe to start and break the ice, you can give us an overview of your journey in tech.
Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I didn't actually start out in tech. I did philosophy at university,
Wow.
and I worked for a while in children's book publishing. And then I sort of was exposed to some technology, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then I started getting more into it, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And then I started teaching myself, and I was like, this is brilliant. This is what I should have been doing all along.
Wow.
So I taught myself some really quite terrible JavaScript and CSS and started applying for jobs unsuccessfully. I can now see why. And after a while doing that, um, I quit my job and I went back to university. I did a conversion course into tech, which was brilliant, and that got me started. And so then I kind of worked, worked several years as an engineer.
Mhm.
Maybe I don't know. I mean, I've been in software engineering for more than 20 years now, so
Wow.
many years as an engineer. Um, and I moved through the stack quite a lot. So
Mm.
I started front end. I then did some back end. When I was at the Government Digital Service, I worked on the infrastructure team for a couple of years. It was meant to be 3 months, but I loved it so much, I stayed for 2 years. Then I became a technical architect, and then after that, I went into technical leadership.
Okay. Wow, what a journey. You really did see the whole all the layers of the stack, right? Front end, back end, infrastructure, you
Yeah,
did everything.
yeah,
And
it's really good. I've got like that whole overview, which is
yeah,
great.
and you worked with the government for quite some years, right?
Mm,
I've read that you launched the new website for the government in UK, the
yeah,
gov.uk initiative. So how did it went?
that was brilliant. So yeah, I joined the Government Digital Service when we were still in private beta
Mm,
for the website, which was about February of 2012, and then we launched it in October, and that was just absolutely brilliant. The thing about the Government Digital Service was the mission. At that time, the UK government spent a lot of money on um, outsourcing tech to big suppliers,
yeah.
and often it costs a lot of money to make small changes. And so the
Hmm.
sort of vision of the Government Digital Service was to bring that in-house to like deliver a better experience for citizens, but also save money on the
Yeah.
external contracts. So it was a really motivating mission, and because of that, loads of like experts in their field took like massive pay cuts to work in the civil service, because the civil
Yeah.
service doesn't pay like a tech company,
Yeah.
um, because they really believed in the mission. So it was an incredible time to be there, because I learned so much from just real experts in all sorts of fields: user research, design, product, engineering, of course. It was great, really good.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I want to ask you more questions about this further along, because it doesn't happen often to chat with an accomplished tech executive who also worked a lot with governmental services,
Mm,
and how maybe it's interesting how it's a different kind of work and then different kind of team and dynamics than a private company.
mm,
So I'd love to learn more about that. But then you moved to Financial Times, right?
yeah.
And you joined as a technical director there, and you stayed for some years.
Yes, yeah. So the last couple of roles I had at GDS, I was doing some technical leadership, some line management, some leading teams. My last role was open source lead, which is really interesting. It was in charge of the open source strategy for the whole of government, but it was it had a lot of influence, but I didn't have a team delivering something.
Oh, okay.
So what really drew me to the Financial Times? A couple of things. So the thing that always motivates me in choosing my jobs is purpose. I really like to work somewhere where I'm feeling like I'm doing something that's adding, positive value to the world. So the Financial Times is, free press is a really obviously a really important issue
Yeah.
in our times. So the purpose really motivated me, and then the role. It was both. It had that kind of influencing piece that I had as part of the open source lead, but I also had a team, and we
Yeah.
were delivering the ft.com website and the app. So that's what drew me there. And then I stayed a long time because it was great. I loved it. It's a really nice place to work. The mission is great. It was really exciting to me to be working in the same building as all these famous journalists, and I could go down to
Yeah.
the newsroom and see it happening. So yeah, that was brilliant.
Yeah, I can imagine. And was it such a big of a change moving from a government institution to a private company like the Financial Times in terms of the way you work, organization, processes, and things
So
like that?
not huge, because like one of the things about about working in the government digital service was we uh, uh, we worked in a very it was very we worked in a very modern, normal modern software development way, and so that
Yeah.
didn't change. It was great, and it was great at the FT as well, very similar in terms of ways of working. Also interesting was there was, tech is a very small field, and there was people moved from similar places. So there were a lot of people at the Guardian newspaper. Many worked at GDS. Many went to the FT. So I actually moved, and there was a lot of very similar, like the architecture of the ft.com was the same as the architecture of gov.uk. So there were a lot of similarities there. I think the biggest difference moving from government to somewhere like the Financial Times is there is a little bit more money to
Yeah.
pay for things like conferences and um, uh, you know this that sounds like very but like coffee and tea. So in the civil service you bring your own coffee and tea because we don't want to
Yeah.
spend public money on. I think going from government digital service to somewhere like Facebook would be a completely different matter.
Yeah.
Uh,
Probably yes.
yeah.
And was also was there something also different by your role? You mentioned that in government digital services you had maybe a lot of influence with the open source initiative,
Mm,
but you didn't have a proper team and a formal
yeah.
authority on many things. While instead, I guess, as a technical director, you joined Financial Times with more of a managerial kind of
Yeah,
duties.
definitely.
Yeah.
So my previous role, before the open source lead role, I was the technical architect on PaaS for government,
Mm.
um, and platform as a service to host government digital services. And at that time, so I was running that team, and I was also line management. So it was a total of about 30,
Mm.
not the same 30, but 30 people. At the FT, when I joined, my team was 55 people, so it's a step up from that. And it was the same people that I was both managing the managers of and kind of directing the work.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a logical progression, but it was a step up.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. And then, which brings us to today, you are CTO at Kooth, right? Which
Hmm.
is about digital health, and it's a recent thing. You've been there for less than a year now, right?
Yeah,
Is it?
yeah.
Okay. And so, what does Kooth do?
So we do digital mental health for children and young people. Um, it we have sort of several parts of our service. We've got like content and tools to help young people, guide themselves. We've got community where people can have, talk about topics, but all our community messages are pre-moderated, so young people can't lead each other off down,
Mm.
an unhelpful track. And then we have drop-in chat with practitioners, so counselors or coaches, And we also have scheduled chat where you might speak to the same counsel, same coach every week for 6 weeks or something. And the chat is text based.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's a full service for mental health for children and young people. And I can tell you similar things drew me, like the purpose
Yeah, I
is
was
the main
about to
thing that
tell
drew me.
that. Yeah, I guess it played a role in making this choice.
Yeah, it's like, again, I think like the mental health of young people is one of the most important issues
Yeah.
at the moment, and it's not trending in the direction that we would like to see. So it's really good to be involved in helping to address that. I think the other things that drew me to Kooth, one was the technical challenges. Really exciting. We've launched a new product in California. It's completely different to our UK product, and so there was a lot of. We hadn't launched it at that stage when I joined, so it was like the technical challenges of getting it done there, and then also thinking about how we work. How we either run two platforms or bring it back to the UK. And then I think the other thing that drew me was Kooth is the Financial Times is a really lovely place to work, but it can be a bit slow at times. It's a 138-year-old organization, and I really liked it. But I wanted to move in a more kind of faster-paced, startup-y. Kooth is not a startup; we're a public company, but there's still that kind of startup-y vibe. Opportunity to really move quickly and have an impact. So those are the things that drew me.
They're not 130 years old.
No. We are pretty. We're pretty established with 23 or 24 years.
Okay, that's
so,
something anyway. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that looks great, and I totally agree about the importance and of doing this kind of work and the sense of purpose that has to be really amazing doing this kind of work. And so something that I've known you about for a long time because I watched so many of your talks is all your ideas about technical strategy, which is one of my absolute favorite topics, and I believe it is one of the things that we don't really talk enough about, possibly because people are not even on the same page about what technical strategy truly is and how is it different from goals and from other things that we may set at work but are not really strategy. So you've made so many great tech experiences in tech where you always had this kind of strategic role. So the first question that I want to ask you is, what is technical strategy for you? What's your personal definition?
Yeah. Great question. And the very sort of deceptively simple answer is that technical strategy is basically doing what the business needs. It is whatever you need to do to do what the business needs. And so for that, you need business strategy.
Yeah.
And then technical strategy, to go a bit more into it, the technical strategy is, how is tech going to help the business deliver on what it needs? Or, for a tech company, how is tech going to, drive the business strategy?
Yeah.
And so that might be doing what's already agreed, the business strategy, or it might be horizon scanning. What can tech do for us that we're not doing yet that actually might help shape the business strategy?
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense, and it makes me think about one of the recent guests that we had on the podcast is Laura Taco, who is CTO at DX, and one of the things that she said that stuck the most with me is that technical roadmaps, thought like roadmaps that are separate from business and product roadmaps, are destined to fail. I mean, they shouldn't exist. So everything exists in a context of doing things together to serve the business. So I think that's similar to what you just said. I mean, it doesn't exist a technical strategy on its own, but it exists to serve what the business needs to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so do you have like examples that you can make about I think both good and bad examples are okay for technical strategy that you have seen possibly in your experiences, things that you can talk about, of course, nothing secret. Uh,
Yeah, sure.
not to blame anybody, but examples of what technical strategy looks like in the real world.
Yeah, sure. I think, I mean, what I can do is talk about like the technical strategy at the FT when I was
Yeah.
a technical director, and technical strategy at Kooth, and what they look like. Um, and so the at the FT, it's very interesting because just before I launched, they had launched a new website. So the old website had been, it was just sort of not just legacy tech, but it was owned by different parts of the business, and you could kind of see that on the homepage. It didn't, fit together. And a small team had like got together and like worked out what a more modern website could be, and then it got bigger and bigger, and then eventually that had become the new website and replaced the old website, and that was called Next. When it was like in production, the code name was Next, and then it just kept being called Next. The team was called Next. All the repos were prefixed by Next, etc. And that was like maybe 18 months before I joined, and it was great. It really that was an example of like driving the business strategy, because it kind of one of the things that team did, which was brilliant, was while it was still in development, they did an experiment that you can't do once it's live, where they slowed down delivery of the website to see what the impact was, and they found that every second delay cost £1 million.
Wow.
So that was like real like drive to focus on performance, and that being a really key metric to focus on.
Can I ask you, how did they measure that? I mean, was it in advertising clicks and
Advertising,
subscriptions? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
There's a blog post about it. It's interesting.
Yeah, I will put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah. And but when I joined, like the business had kind of moved on to thinking about other things, so there wasn't a clear strategy for what was going to happen with the website, and so the kind of direction had kind of been lost as the business focus had gone elsewhere, and I could see some of the things that I'd seen start to happen after we launched Gov.uk, which is when you don't keep the focus on it, things start to drift, and then you start having kind of, maybe teams are making different technical directions and things are going kind of off track a bit.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I looked for was like, what is the business's strategy around the website? But actually at that time, the focus was elsewhere. That wasn't the focus. So then I was like, okay, so there isn't a business strategy for this. So we need to create a tech strategy independent of the business strategy. And the project to build Next cost £10 million, and it took 2 years. So that was 2 years during which, stakeholders in the business couldn't get what they needed from the website team. So I was like, okay, I don't know at this moment what the business needs from the website, but I do know what they don't need. They don't need to go through all that again. They don't need to spend another £10 million, another 2 years rebuilding it again. So then I was like, right, our tech strategy is no next.
Yeah. Yeah. Love this.
Which is good because it's catchy. And so then our strategy was all about, sustainability, about making sure that we were replacing bits of it in flight so they didn't go off track. We were not letting it become the new legacy.
Yeah.
And so that is an example of a tech strategy which is kind of independent of the business strategy.
Yeah.
It was basically like, be ready for when this becomes important to the business again, so that we can do then what's needed.
Yeah, I think that's a great example because I think it explains that the synergy between business strategy and technology isn't necessarily strictly top down. That is, you get this kind of input and you develop your own technical strategy around it, but it can also be the other way around, that engineering informs the business of what can be done. It acts as an enabler, and then the business says, okay, so we can do this. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so at Kooth, it's like quite different. So at Kooth, we have a really clear business strategy. Something I really like is that they were using this when I joined. They were already partway through this process called Play to Win,
Hmm.
and it's based on a book. And it's about it's a particular way of developing strategy, which is the principle is basically you can play to play or you can play to win.
Okay.
And so it's looking at where will you be where is this the area that you can play to win in, and where are you just kind of in the market but you're not
Okay.
actually making, there's no differentiator, or you're not making a difference, or and the book is worth reading. I'm actually in the process of writing a blog post on it, so watch this space. But it outlines this really nice process to follow to get to your kind of strategic goals. And so then we don't have an explicit tech strategy. We know what the business strategy is, and then so then our tech strategy, such as it is more about things like principles, operationalizing our out of hours process, that kind of thing. So it's like the opposite in a way.
I love the idea of separating between the things that you can, where you can play to win versus play just, without kind of differentiating yourself. And then it makes me think about a few months back, we have a book club in the community of refactoring of the newsletter. And a few months back, we read Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard
That's a
Hummelt, which I
great
loved.
book.
Yeah, it's a great book. And one of the things that I love the most, which I think the book I think gets right many things that you couldn't put your finger on, and then it's so good at explaining. And the fact that strategy can be so narrow and so about very specific things, you don't have to design an overarching plan for doing everything,
Yeah,
and it's about finding small points of leverage.
exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was just going to say that. Yeah,
Yes.
totally.
So maybe we find strategy so hard sometimes because we try to do too many things.
Yeah,
And yeah. Is
yeah,
that did you see that in your experience? I mean, did you see successful strategy? I mean, looking at successful strategies that you've seen were more
yeah.
about like finding few big action items and things that worked really well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I totally, I was just going to say that about leverage. Like, I think it's about the strategic thing to do is to look for where you can get the most leverage. So what is something you can do that is low effort and lower effort and has a outsized impact? So what are the really key things you can do? Definitely, it's all so exciting. We always try and do too much, but good strategy tells you what you're not going to do as well. It's about making choices. If your strategy if everyone's like, yeah, it's a great strategy, then you haven't decided anything.
Yeah,
Um,
probably.
I think in terms of simplicity, so at the Government Digital Service, what we said there was the strategy is delivery, and that was it. The strategy is delivery, and it was just about making sure that we delivered good experiences for citizens, and that really helped focus the mind as well.
Yeah. So sometimes I mean, even if you are just able to find the correct things to focus on, even if it's not like there's no big insight, but just the focus itself makes for a good strategy. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking about people who are watching these conversations maybe and
Oh,
think,
sorry.
okay,
Actually, sorry. I know you're
yeah,
about to ask another question, but there's something additional to that.
yeah,
Actually,
yeah, yeah.
that point, which is, I did a course at the Institute of Directors, which was really interesting on strategy for board directors. And one of the things they talked about is like all the process of strategy, and they talk about this in Play to Win as well. It's not one and done. And a really important part of strategy is evaluate and review and change.
Yeah.
And so, actually, it is better to have a poor strategy and then you evaluate it and change it over time than it is to have a perfect strategy which you then don't evaluate. So what you just said, I think, is really insightful. It's like the important thing is the focus.
Yeah.
It's less important that it's correct
Yeah.
than that you focus on something and try and make that work.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And so speaking of working on the strategy to improve it over time, right? So how do you do it? That is, sometimes strategy is not something that you get asked for, or it falls to
Yeah.
the cracks of the rest of the work you do. So how was it in your experience? Did you create a process around it to keep it updated, to bring people on board, like councils
Yeah.
where you could design this with others, with your peers?
Yes, definitely. So at the FT, what we did was we had a quarterly um, session with principal engineers, senior engineers, and then somebody from product, somebody from design, somebody from delivery, and what we did at any one time is we had 3 initiatives in play, and so in the quarterly discussion we'd talk about, are we still on track, are we working on the most important things, if something is finished, then what's the next thing to put into that slot, are these still the top 3 priorities, and so that was a quarterly session, and then we'd follow that up a week later with a tech talk to the whole of the team, to explain where we were and what the next things were and take questions. It was very it was like really there's a lot of discussion, so that was also a really useful part of it, because people would raise questions, maybe raise things we hadn't thought about, might need to take into account. So that was the process we followed at the FT.
And
That was
so
good.
what I'm hearing is that you were having these meetings with product people, business people. So
Mm.
this was not strictly technical, right? So we're
Oh
talking
no.
about the overall product and company strategy even here.
Yeah, I mean, these meetings were specifically about the tech strategy and what we would do within engineering, but also we needed, the input of it's not, like you said earlier, it's not in isolation. It doesn't make sense in
Yeah,
isolation. So,
exactly.
product need to know what we're thinking. We need to know what they're thinking, etc.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking about people who may be watching these conversations, and maybe one is an engineering manager, a line manager, or an executive, or a manager or manager. Sometimes I think some people may believe that strategy is more of a very high level executive thing, right? Uh, as opposed to something that you have to take care about as a line manager, for example, or a tech leader of various kinds. So, but do you think instead there are different levels of strategy? So how does strategy trickles down to the whole organization?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think it's something that should be the preserve of just the exec.
Yeah,
I think so there's a couple of things. Like one, it is very useful to involve people in the exec team will set the business strategy, but that other people can expect to be involved in that process. So with Play to Win, for example, one of the things is strategic tests, where you say what would have to be true for this to be a good strategy for us. And for that part, we definitely, like that, we couldn't have done that just within the exec. It's definitely something that
yeah,
involves lots of people. So that's one aspect about the sort of top level strategy. But then, I mean, I think you need strategy at every level. What the strategy looks like isn't necessarily as far reaching as like this is what we're doing across the whole business. But you want to have a strategy and a plan for what you're doing, whether you're tech lead, whether you're a senior engineer, in charge of a small team, because you don't want to be just moving from pillar to post without sort of going in any direction.
yeah,
There is something about like what is strategy, what is tactics at one level is
yeah.
maybe strategy at the
The level
um,
below.
yeah. So like my boss might have a sort of tactical point about how we use AI, and then that for me might be what is our AI strategy.
Yeah,
And so there is something there as well, but I don't think it's quite that. It's not quite that
yeah,
tactic strategy. Yeah, no, I think everyone everyone can be involved in strategy,
yeah.
and I think it's really useful to get into that way of thinking as early as possible in your career.
Yeah. So do you think, for example, you manage a team and
Mm,
you think each team, maybe a product team, a cross-functional
mm,
team, should have like its own small team strategy, which has a story about how it carries to the more overarching company strategy. So is it how the strategy gets passed through the different levels?
Yeah, I mean, that is great. As you say, it should all map up into one.
Yeah.
You don't want one team, the platform team, have a strategy that is completely at odds
Yeah, on its
with,
own.
another team or the business strategy. But yeah, I think like that's the ideal. Each team has their, their strategy,
Yeah.
and it is maps up to the.
Yeah. And you have like a mental model, a framework about how to work on strategy itself. For example, we mentioned good strategy, bad strategy, and the author creates this framework, right, about diagnosis, policy, and actions.
Yeah.
Are there a specific set of steps that you go through to think about this?
Yeah, so I think the that is the model that I follow, and that also seems to be replicated in a similar the course I did at the IOD. It's a similar layout in Play to Win, and it's basically diagnosis, vision, and coherent action to get where you need to be. And the diagnosis is you need to know what the current situation is, where you are. And that's looking, and there are lots of kind of models you can use to get that understanding, but essentially it's where you are. And something I really liked about the IOD course was the instructor talked about, can you hear the baby cry? Because if a baby's crying, it's something you need to do something about, and then there's a limited number of things you need to do. You need to feed it or cuddle it or change it. And so that's kind of with the diagnosis. Like the first part is, can you hear the baby cry? What is the key challenge or opportunity that is facing the business and that you need to take action on? And then the next thing is, what's the action you need to take? Then I think you work out the direction. Like there are various frameworks for how to do that, but where do you want to get to? And then how do you get there? What are the high leverage activities, the coherent steps you take?
Yeah, and so the focus elements start with the diagnosis itself. It's not like the diagnosis starts, wide, and then you narrow down, let's say, your actions. You already focus on a specific challenge from the very beginning.
Yeah, well, the challenge I think is more the challenge or opportunity is more about where you want to get to. The diagnosis is where are we? So, for example, like a way you can look at think about your business strategy, and you can do this in tech as well, but it works really well for business strategy. Is like PESTLE. Have you heard of PESTLE? PESTLE, where it's I'm not going to be able to remember this, but political, environmental, social, technological, some other things, and you look into each of those areas.
Okay.
Think about what are the trends, what's happening, what might change, and that gives you like part of the diagnosis of your current situation. And so when you've gathered all your diagnosis together, like all that kind of, then you're better able to see what are the main, like what's the challenge or the opportunity that is the thing that we should really focus on.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And throughout this whole process that we described, so we've now got more into how you create strategy, and before we have talked about making other people involved, etc. What are the most common pitfalls that you have seen that prevent a good result? Is it more in one of these steps, or is it like maybe you're not getting the right people involved? How was it in your experience?
I think the biggest potential pitfall is just doing it once and putting it down, and that's it, done.
Yeah.
And there's two things that don't work there. One, we've already talked about evaluating it. You need to see is your strategy working and make changes. But the other is like communication is the most important part of strategy. Everyone has to know what your strategy is. Otherwise, people don't know how to work, how to make sure that their work is adding to the strategy. Communication is really, it's really difficult to do enough communication because communicating enough is repeating yourself over and over again until you are sick of the sound of your own voice saying the same words, and then still carrying on saying the same stuff. Because people, it just doesn't, it doesn't land the first time you say it, or the second, or someone missed the meeting, or they weren't listening, or they've forgotten. And it's not just, the meeting, it's the email and the memo and the company presentation and the, documentation and, whatever. And that, I think, is that those two together are the easiest way that a strategy fails, because they're both quite hard. They don't sort of fit into the natural flow. Like the natural flow of work doesn't go, oh, let's revisit the strategy and check it's working, unless you make it such. And then communicating, it just feels like saying the same thing over and over again. It's hard to really, make time for that ahead of the other things you could be moving forward on. But they're both absolutely crucial.
Yeah, about communication, probably it's not about being the hardest thing in absolute, but maybe the most counterintuitive, or the thing where people, have a bad idea of the worst idea about what kind of effort you have to put in versus what is the right amount of effort that it's. I mean, I don't remember where I heard this quote that like over communicating is communicating usually.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that a lot.
That's one of those cases, probably. And speaking of communication, so we have mentioned having meetings and agreeing with not only your technical peers, but with product and business. And how does it work instead with taking input and feedback from lower levels, like bottom up input about strategy and so on? And how do you get eventually buy-in? How do you get contribution from the rest of the team?
I mean, with at the FT, it was a very open culture, and people felt really. So we would give a presentation, and then people would just stick their hand up and say, "What about this other thing?" and this isn't going to work, and that kind of thing. It was great. It was a really kind of, but it's a lot of work to create that kind of collaborative culture. So if you don't necessarily have that, there are lots of other things, and you do have to seek out that input, because the people who are, maybe the most junior people doing the most work, other people have the real sight of how this is working on the ground. So they have the most information. And so, there are lots of things you can do. Once we did it team by team. So we did a smaller group, because just to make sure that people who didn't feel comfortable speaking up in a big group could speak up. You might ask all your line managers to put it on the agenda and ask people one-on-one how they feel. Another thing you can do is anonymous questions are quite good for getting out people's thoughts, either in a presentation, anonymous questions, or anonymous submissions that don't necessarily get broadcast. But it's definitely the other thing that we did at the FT, and we do at Kooth, is making sure that people are working on, it's the actual working on it. It involves people. So at the FT we had 3 priorities, and then there would be various different combinations, but it might be a senior engineer and a principal engineer were working on that, or different combination. And at Kooth, for example, with our platform strategy, people are working on the platform strategy. So making sure that people there feel able to talk about the work they're doing and say if they think this isn't the right work.
I think this is very tricky to get right. It's similar to all these kind of processes where you had to keep some kind of top-down alignment, but also get bottom-up input, like goal setting and all these things. And so do you have various stages, and maybe you schedule them, you time box how things get done? Because I can easily see how you can be very good at diverging on different ideas, and then it's hard to converge on a final result.
Yes. Yeah. So at the FT it was more structured. So we did the convergence point was the convergence across the whole thing was the quarterly, and then if there'd be various check-ins. I would have various check-ins with the people working on it throughout that. Kooth is a smaller team, so we talk. The engineering leadership. We talk about what's happening and what's in play.
Okay.
I'm thinking now, what more formal things I could do there. This is good. This is really useful. Maybe I'll suggest some other.
Yes, I'm thinking, about my own past issues about converging on, OKRs and things like
Oh
that.
yeah.
That in terms of process are kind of similar, right? I mean, you have to converge as a whole team by keeping both the strategic themes and also the input of the people who have the most information on the ground, right? They know better many times, and
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's very very important.
Yeah, and it's difficult. OKRs definitely, like I've never seen that quite got that balance right. It's very difficult to like um have people, teams working out what they think their OKRs should be, the business working out what the OKRs should be, and converging, and it not taking the whole quarter, and suddenly it's time to set the next quarter's OKRs.
Yeah. It takes two moms out of three to
Yeah,
create the OKRs, right?
yeah,
Yeah, I think there are so many ways it can fail, but thinking about my own experience, I think it's very similar to when you said that good strategy is very focused on a few things.
mm,
And so I think for OKRs it's kind of the same. I think that the easiest way to fail on that is to try to do too many things and then
mm,
create this kind of tree, this kind of, all these
yeah,
levels for the various teams. While if you really focus on a few core company things that are easy to understand by everybody,
yeah,
then it's half of the work already.
yeah, totally, yeah.
Yeah,
And that's
and
what we do at Kooth. We've got three objectives for the year. It's
yeah,
really clear. I really like that.
yeah, and thinking about like engineering managers or even ICs with some managerial
Mm.
duties, do you are there like specific roles that you should work more or less on strategy? Is there a theme about having formal versus
Mm.
more situational authority about creating strategy? Is there something? Is it something that you should proactively try to push? Have you ever found yourself in such a situation?
Mm. That's really interesting because I've been thinking about that recently: positional authority versus, um, you know, um, as in authority that you get by virtue of being in charge of something versus the
Yeah,
authority you have
yeah,
by being able to sell your ideas to your peers and influence.
yeah,
Because they're two different things and they're both really important. Um, uh, but like to answer your question, I think that it as an IC or an engineering manager, I think it is good to seek to be involved in strategy.
mm,
And I don't think that there's any roles that are more or less suited to it. Um, I mean, it's more interesting, right? If you're
yeah.
involved in
True.
like helping set the strategy, it's like it's really I find it really compelling because it's very easy for a lot of what we do in engineering to actually just this we're quite good at like avoiding toil and busy work and bringing in automation, and so it's like the extension of that where it's everything you do is leading towards a greater
Yeah,
purpose, which is just really interesting and motivating. And I don't I think that as an engineering manager or as an IC, you've got different like skills to bring to it, but your insight and understanding the direction will be
yeah.
as worthwhile.
Yeah, I think sometimes even just asking questions, asking the right questions
Yeah.
about your work goes a long way. I remember I've been for many years CTO and founder of a
Mm,
small startup, and as a
mm,
startup, things are changing all the time. You don't always
mm,
have stable strategy, especially on the technical side for the things you want to do. And I remember having this very talented engineer who was seemed to be very skeptical of everything we
mm,
decided to do. And he was always asking questions like, why are we doing this? Why are we
yeah.
doing that? And
Yeah.
after a while, it kind of kept me at a high bar because I
Yeah.
had to think about, okay, why, what is the answer to this? What is the strategy? What is the goal?
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought about this. Maybe just asking
Yeah.
questions is a good starting point.
Definitely. Yeah. That thing like it's keeping you honest. It's really
Yeah.
good.
And so my final question about this might be, how do you get started? I mean, let's say you are in a place where um, at your company, at your team, you're in a
Yeah.
position to do something, but you've never done such a work with your
Mm,
other, peers or stakeholders. your company or your team doesn't have this kind of history of investing in your technical strategy, or your ideas are all over the place.
Yeah.
You don't have that focus. Where do you start?
Yeah. So I would suggest starting by reading Good Strategy, Bad Strategy,
I agree.
and also working with someone else. So I think another sort of mistake you can make when starting out in strategy is going off into a room and doing it by yourself and then presenting it to people as here's our strategy. But if you don't get buy-in for your strategy, it's never gonna go anywhere. So start working with someone else from the beginning. Find a peer or someone in another team who is also thinking that they'd like to get more involved in strategy, or also thinking there must be a better way to do these things, or something like that. And then together start working through some kind of process, whether it's as in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, or another kind of process.
Yeah.
And then you two, or small group, can start working on that. You've already got over the first hurdle, which is getting sort of wider buy-in, and then you can start shopping it around various
Yes.
other people.
Yeah, I agree. And I love the advice about reading the book, because it's really one of my favorite books. So I may ask, what do you like the most about the book?
Oh, it's just so
You
I
can
don't
tell
know what.
more things, not just one, maybe.
Yeah,
I'll tell
what
you
did I like?
mine as well.
So I loved the clarity about it's not you've got to if everyone loves it, then it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
I really loved the idea about thinking about what are the highest leverage actions, because obviously there are lots of things we can do to get from where we are to where we want to be, but what are the things that are really going to move the needle, and let's focus on those small number of things.
Yeah.
There's a lot I liked about it, thinking about reading it again, actually, because I think maybe I'll pick up more the next time through. But I think the sort of overall thing was, before I read it, I didn't know what strategy was. I just thought it was something I should be doing. And afterwards, I felt like, right, okay, I could do this.
Yeah. And I think that's because of so many great examples. I think it's the
Yeah.
book most filled with examples that I've ever read. And when I think about it, it's not trivial that the book is called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, as opposed to, I don't know, how to create good strategy, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the author thought, okay, there is so much bad strategy out there that the most effective way to, to make you learn about good strategy is to educate your taste, even about what bad strategy looks like. Like half of the examples are bad strategy, probably.
Yeah. Totally.
And I love that. And I mean, it's one of the things that you take for granted when you read the book. But I mean, it was a very smart choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that. So Anna, thank you so much for this chat. I loved it, really. And thank you again for coming on the show.
Great. No, thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.